The autumn rain had turned Madison Avenue into a blur of umbrellas and expensive coats, but Natasha Wright barely noticed as she rushed down the sidewalk, her $300 heels clicking against the wet pavement. Her phone had died somewhere between the board meeting and her car, and she was already 20 minutes late for a conference call that could make or break a $12 million acquisition. She needed to know the time desperately, and her driver was circling the block somewhere in this mess of traffic. That was when she saw him standing outside a small corner deli, holding the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 5 years old. The man wore a worn jacket that had seen better days, his jeans faded but clean, and he was crouched down, carefully adjusting the hood of his daughter's pink raincoat. When Natasha approached them, nearly breathless, he looked up. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp with stress. "Do you have the time?" The man stood slowly, his hand still protectively holding the little girl's, and checked a simple watch on his wrist. But before he answered, he smiled. It was the kind of smile that reached his eyes, warm and genuine, the kind that made the chaotic city seem to pause for just a moment. "It's 4:37, he said, his voice deep and calm. "You okay? You look like you're having a rough day." Natasha found herself staring at him for a beat too long. There was something disarming about his concern, about the way he looked at her like she was a person, and not just another stressed-out executive in a designer suit. His eyes were a warm brown, and there were laugh lines around them that suggested he smiled often, despite what she guessed were probably difficult circumstances based on his appearance. "I'm fine, thank you," she managed, already turning to leave. "Daddy, is that lady lost?" The little girl asked, her voice sweet and curious. The man chuckled softly. "I don't think so, sweetheart. She just needed help." Something made Natasha stop. Maybe it was the genuine kindness in his voice, or maybe it was the way the little girl looked up at her father with such complete trust and adoration. She turned back around. "Thank you," she said, meaning it this time. "Really?" He nodded, that warm smile appearing again. "Anytime. Hope your day gets better." As Natasha walked away, she found herself glancing back once. The man was lifting his daughter onto his shoulders, laughing as she squealed with delight, completely unbothered by the rain. There was something beautiful about it, something that stayed with her long after her driver finally found her and she made it back to her office. The conference call was a disaster. Natasha's mind kept wandering, which never happened. She was known for her laser focus, her ability to negotiate deals that left competitors wondering how she'd pulled it off. At 32, she was the youngest CEO in her company's history, running a venture capital firm that specialized in turning struggling businesses into profitable enterprises. She'd built her reputation on being ruthless when necessary, compassionate when strategic, and always in control. But that evening, sitting in her corner office overlooking the glittering city, she couldn't stop thinking about that smile. About the way that father had looked at his daughter with such pure love, about how a simple question about the time had made her feel more seen than she had in months. "You're being ridiculous," she muttered to herself, gathering her things. "He was just a nice guy." There are plenty of nice guys in the world. Except there weren't, not really. Not in her world of mergers and acquisitions, of power plays and carefully calculated risks. In her world, every smile came with an agenda, every conversation a potential negotiation. She dated men who saw her as a prize to be won, a status symbol, or worse, a threat to their own success. She'd learned to keep her guard up, to never let anyone too close, but something about that moment on the street had slipped past her defenses. The next day, Natasha found herself walking past that same deli on her way to lunch. She told herself it was just a convenient location, that the sandwiches there were probably good. She didn't admit, even to herself, that she was hoping to see him again. He wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. New York City had 8 million people, and the chances of running into the same stranger twice were astronomically low. She got her sandwich and returned to her office, feeling foolish. But fate, or coincidence, or whatever force governed random encounters in massive cities, had other plans. 3 days later, Natasha was at a different coffee shop, one she rarely visited, when she heard a familiar voice behind her in line. "Can I get a small coffee, black, and a hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, please?" She turned, and there he was, his daughter once again at his side, this time in a yellow raincoat covered with ducks. The little girl was chattering excitedly about something, her hands gesturing wildly as she spoke. "And then the butterfly landed right on my nose, Daddy, right on my nose." "That must have been amazing, Mia," he said, his voice full of genuine interest. Natasha felt her heart do something strange in her chest. Before she could overthink it, she spoke. "Small world," she said. He turned, and recognition flickered across his face, followed by that smile. "Hey, it's the woman who needed the time. How did your day turn out?" "Better than expected, actually," she lied. Then, surprising herself, she added, "I'm Natasha." "Kyle," he said, shifting his daughter's hand to offer her a handshake. His grip was firm, his palms slightly calloused. "This is my daughter, Mia." "Hi," Mia said brightly, waving with her free hand. "I'm 5 3/4. Natasha couldn't help but smile. 5 3/4 is a very good age. It's the best age, Mia confirmed seriously. "Daddy says every age is the best age, but I think 5 3/4 is the most best." Kyle laughed, and the sound was rich and warm. "She's got strong opinions about pretty much everything." They moved up in line together, and Natasha ordered her usual espresso. When Kyle reached for his wallet to pay, she noticed how carefully he counted out the bills, making sure he had enough. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about his situation. Still, he didn't seem embarrassed or ashamed, just careful. "Let me get this," Natasha said impulsively. Kyle looked at her, surprise flickering across his face. "That's really not necessary." "I know, but you helped me out the other day when I was stressed. Consider it a thank you." He hesitated, and she could see the pride warring with practicality in his expression. Finally, he nodded. "That's kind of you. Thank you." They collected their drinks, and Natasha knew she should leave, should get back to the office where a dozen different crises were probably waiting. But instead, she found herself asking, "Do you have a few minutes to sit?" Kyle glanced at Mia, who was already eyeing a table near the window with a cozy bench seat. "Yeah, actually, we're having an adventure day. Nothing but fun and no schedule." "Adventure day sounds wonderful," Natasha said, following them to the table. Mia climbed onto the bench and immediately started blowing on her hot chocolate, her face scrunched up in concentration. Kyle sat beside her, and Natasha took the chair across from them. "So what does an adventure day entail?" Natasha asked. "Well," Kyle said, his eyes twinkling, "we started with the park, where we found 17 different kinds of leaves. Then we went to the library for story time. Now we're here, and after this, we're going to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge and count all the boats we see." "I want to see 100 boats," Mia announced. 100 is a lot of boats, sweetheart," Kyle said gently, "but we can definitely try." Natasha felt something twist in her chest. There was such love in the way he spoke to his daughter, such patience. She found herself wanting to know everything about him, how he'd ended up as a single father, what his story was, what made him smile like that. "That sounds like a perfect day," she said. "What about you?" Kyle asked. "What does your perfect day look like?" No one had asked her that in years. Natasha had to think about it. "Honestly, I don't know. My days are usually back-to-back meetings, phone calls, contracts to review. I can't remember the last time I did something just for fun." Kyle studied her, and she felt exposed under his gaze, like he could see past the expensive suit and perfect makeup to the loneliness underneath. "That sounds exhausting." "It is," she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty, "but it's what I signed up for." "Is it what you want, though?" The question hung in the air between them. Before Natasha could answer, Mia piped up. "Daddy says we should do things that make our hearts happy," she said, marshmallow on her upper lip. "Does your work make your heart happy?" out of the mouths of babes. Natasha looked at this little girl with her innocent question and her sticky face, and she felt something crack inside her. "You know what?" she said slowly. "I'm not sure it does anymore." Kyle reached over and wiped Mia's face with a napkin, then looked back at Natasha. "Life's too short to spend it doing things that don't make you happy. I know that sounds simplistic, especially coming from a guy who probably looks like he's got it all figured out." He laughed, a slightly self-deprecating sound. "Trust me, I don't. But I do know that every day I get with this little one is a gift, and I'm not going to waste it being miserable." "What do you do?" Natasha asked. "For work, I mean." "I'm a carpenter," Kyle said. "I do custom furniture, restoration work, whatever I can get. It doesn't pay great, but I'm my own boss and I can work around Mia's schedule. That's what matters to me." Natasha felt a rush of respect for him. He'd prioritized what mattered, even if it meant struggling financially. That took courage, especially in a city as expensive as New York. "That must be challenging," she said carefully, not wanting to sound condescending. Kyle shrugged. "Some days are harder than others, but we make it work. We've got a small apartment in Queens, we eat a lot of pasta, and Mia's got more toys from thrift stores than from regular shops. But she's happy, healthy, and she knows she's loved. That's what counts." "Where's her mother?" The question slipped out before Natasha could stop it. "I'm sorry, that was intrusive." "It's okay," Kyle said, though something flickered in his eyes. "She left when Mia was 6 months old. Said she wasn't ready to be a mother, that she'd made a mistake. I haven't heard from her since." "I'm sorry," Natasha said quietly. "Don't be. It hurt at the time, but honestly, Mia and I are better off. She deserves people in her life who want to be there, not someone who sees her as a burden." Mia, who had been happily coloring on a napkin with a crayon she'd pulled from her pocket, looked up at her father with such adoration that Natasha felt her eyes sting. "Daddy's the best," Mia said simply. "He makes me pancakes with faces, and he reads me 3 stories every night, and he always knows when I need hugs." Kyle's expression softened impossibly further. "And you're my favorite person in the whole world, Bug." Natasha had to look away, overwhelmed by the simple beauty of their relationship. This was what love looked like, she realized. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but this quiet, steady devotion. This willingness to sacrifice everything for someone else's happiness. They talked for another 20 minutes, the conversation flowing easily. Kyle told her about some of the furniture pieces he was working on, his face lighting up as he described the grain of a particular piece of walnut he'd found. Mia interjected with stories about her kindergarten class, about her best friend Sophie, about the science experiment they'd done with vinegar and baking soda. And Natasha talked too, finding herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone in years. She told them about growing up in a small town in Pennsylvania, about how she'd worked her way through college, about the thrill she'd felt landing her first big deal. "You must be really good at what you do," Kyle said, genuine admiration in his voice. "I am," Natasha said, not arrogantly but simply as fact. "But I think I've lost sight of why I started doing it in the first place." "What was the reason?" Kyle asked. "I wanted to help people," Natasha said slowly, realizing it as she spoke. "I wanted to save businesses, to protect jobs, to make a difference. But somewhere along the way, it just became about the money and the power." "It's not too late to change," Kyle said, "to remember what mattered." Their eyes met across the table, and Natasha felt that same jolt she'd experienced on the street days before. There was something between them, something real and unexpected, and possibly completely insane given how little they knew each other. "Daddy, we need to go count boats," Mia said, tugging on Kyle's sleeve. Kyle checked his watch. "You're right, Bug. We've got a bridge to walk across." He looked at Natasha. "This was really nice. Thank you for the coffee." "Thank you for the conversation," Natasha said, meaning it deeply. They stood, and for a moment, Natasha thought that would be it. They'd walk away and she'd never see him again. The thought made her chest tighten. "Maybe," she said quickly, before she could lose her nerve, "we could do this again, I mean if you'd want to." I'd really like to hear more about your work, and see you again, both of you. Kyle's smile was slow and warm, and it made her feel like she'd just won the lottery. I'd like that too. Let me give you my number. They exchanged phones, fingers fumbling slightly, both grinning like teenagers instead of two adults in their 30s. When Natasha looked at the contact he'd entered, she saw he'd put in Kyle the carpenter with a little hammer emoji. Cute, she said. Mia's idea, he admitted. She likes to add emojis to everyone's names in my phone. They said their goodbyes on the sidewalk outside the coffee shop. Mia gave Natasha an enthusiastic wave, and Kyle's eyes lingered on hers for just a moment longer than necessary. As Natasha walked back to her office, she realized she was smiling. Really, truly smiling in a way she hadn't in months. Her assistant looked startled when she walked through the door. Miss Wright, are you all right? You're glowing. I'm fine, Jennifer, Natasha said, still smiling. Actually, I'm better than fine. Can you clear my schedule for tomorrow afternoon? I think I need some time to think about where we're taking the company. Jennifer looked shocked but nodded. Natasha Wright never cleared her schedule. She worked through holidays, weekends, even her own birthday. But something had shifted, and for the first time in years, Natasha felt like she was waking up from a long sleep. That evening, lying in bed in her pristine apartment overlooking Central Park, Natasha stared at Kyle's number in her phone. Should she text him? Was it too soon? What would she even say before she could overthink it? Her phone buzzed. A message from Kyle. Made it across the bridge. Mia counted 63 boats and is very disappointed we didn't reach 100. She also wanted me to tell you that you have nice hair and seem like you give good hugs. Kids are weird. But she's a good judge of character. Sleep well. Natasha found herself laughing out loud, alone in her apartment. She typed back. Tell Mia thank you and that she seems like she gives excellent hugs too. I had a really good time today. I'd love to see you both again soon. His response came quickly. How about Saturday? There's a street fair in our neighborhood, nothing fancy, just food trucks and live music and arts and crafts. Mia would love to show you around her turf. That sounds perfect. Great. Fair warning though, it's Queens. Very different from Madison Avenue. Good. I could use some different in my life. The days until Saturday crawled by. Natasha found herself distracted during meetings, checking her phone for messages from Kyle. They texted throughout the week, nothing deep but little glimpses into each other's lives. He'd send her pictures of the furniture he was working on, his hands covered in sawdust. She'd send him photos of the view from her office, the city spread out below her. Bet the view from down here is better, though, he texted back. More human. He was right. When Saturday finally arrived, Natasha stood in front of her closet for 20 minutes, trying to figure out what to wear to a street fair in Queens. Everything she owned was either business formal or cocktail party elegant. Finally, she settled on her most casual outfit, dark jeans she'd bought but never worn, a soft cream sweater, and simple flats. She left her hair down instead of in its usual sleek bun and wore minimal makeup. The subway ride to Queens was an adventure in itself. Natasha couldn't remember the last time she'd taken the subway instead of having her driver. But it felt right somehow, this journey to see Kyle and Mia, like she was stepping into a different version of herself. Kyle had given her the address of a small park where the fair was being held. When she emerged from the subway station, she could already hear the music, see the colorful booths set up along the street. It was nothing like the high-end events she usually attended, but it was full of life and laughter and genuine joy. She found Kyle and Mia near a booth selling handmade jewelry. Mia spotted her first. Natasha, she squealed, running over. You came. Kyle turned, and the smile that spread across his face made Natasha's heart skip. He looked good, wearing a dark blue Henley that showed off broad shoulders and strong arms the build of a man who worked with his hands. His hair was slightly messy, like he'd been running his fingers through it, and there was something about him that just felt solid. Real. Hey, he said warmly, you found us. I did, Natasha said, returning his smile. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for coming all the way out here. I know it's not your usual scene. Good, Natasha said firmly. My usual scene is getting old. Mia grabbed Natasha's hand with the casual familiarity of a child who'd already decided she liked someone. Come on, I want to show you everything. The next few hours were some of the best Natasha had had in years. They wandered through the fair, stopping at booth after booth. Mia insisted Natasha needed to try the empanadas from a food truck run by a local family, and she was right, they were delicious. They watched a group of kids perform a dance routine, Mia bouncing along to the music. They browsed through stalls selling everything from vintage books to handmade soaps. Kyle was easy to be around. He didn't try to impress her or show off. He was just himself, attentive to Mia, friendly with the vendors who clearly knew him, quick to laugh and make Natasha laugh too. He had a way of seeing the humor and beauty in small moments, pointing out things she would have walked past without noticing. Look at that dog, he said at one point, gesturing to a tiny chihuahua in a sweater that said, "Born to be wild." That dog has no idea how ridiculous it looks, and I respect that. Pure confidence. Natasha laughed so hard she snorted, which made Mia giggle uncontrollably, which made all three of them dissolve into laughter for no good reason, except that it felt good to laugh together. As the afternoon wore on, they found themselves sitting on a bench, watching Mia play on a nearby playground. Kyle had bought them all ice cream, despite Natasha's protests that she should pay. "You bought coffee last time," he said simply. "My turn." "You know," Natasha said, licking her ice cream cone, "I feel like I should be honest with you about something." Kyle turned to her, concern flickering in his eyes. "Okay. I'm not great at this, at being casual, at making friends, at whatever this is. My whole life has been about work for so long that I don't really know how to do anything else." "You seem like you're doing pretty well to me," Kyle said gently. "You've made Mia's day, and that's not easy to do. She's a tough critic." "She's amazing," Natasha said, watching the little girl navigate the monkey bars with determination. "You're doing an incredible job with her." Kyle's expression softened. "I'm trying. Some days I'm sure I'm screwing it all up, that she deserves better than a dad who can barely make rent some months, who can't buy her new clothes or take her on fancy vacations. But then she looks at me with those big eyes and tells me I'm the best daddy in the world, and I think maybe I'm doing okay." "You're doing more than okay," Natasha said firmly. "She's happy, Kyle, really, genuinely happy. Do you know how rare that is? Most kids I encounter are shuttled between activities and private tutors and stressed-out nanas. Mia is joyful. That's because of you." Kyle looked at her for a long moment, and something passed between them, something deeper than simple attraction. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Anything? Why are you here? I don't mean that in a rude way, but you're clearly successful, sophisticated, probably have 100 better things to do with your Saturday than hang out at a street fair in Queens with a single dad and his kid. So why?" Natasha considered the question carefully. "Because when I asked you for the time that day, you smiled at me like I was a person worth seeing, not a CEO or a deal to be made or a rung on some social ladder, just a person who needed help. And in that moment, I realized how long it had been since anyone had looked at me like that, like I mattered beyond what I could do for them." "You do matter," Kyle said quietly, "beyond all that other stuff. I'm not so sure anyone in my regular life would agree with you." "Then you need to find a better regular life." Natasha laughed, but there was truth in his words that hit her hard. She'd built this incredible career, accumulated wealth and power and influence, but somewhere along the way, she'd lost touch with what actually made life worth living. Daddy. "Natasha, watch this," Mia called from the top of the slide. They both turned to watch as she slid down with her arms in the air, laughing with pure delight. When she reached the bottom, she jumped up and ran back to do it again. "She's going to do that about 40 more times," Kyle said with a grin. "Fair warning." "I've got nowhere else to be," Natasha said, and realized she meant it. As the sun began to set, the fare started to wind down. Mia was dragging, her eyes heavy despite her insistence that she wasn't tired. Kyle scooped her up, and she immediately rested her head on his shoulder. "Someone's ready for bed," he said softly, rubbing her back. "No, I'm not," Mia mumbled, already half asleep. "Can I walk you guys home?" Natasha asked. "Or to the subway at least?" "We're actually just a few blocks from here," Kyle said. "But yeah, I'd like that." They walked slowly through the darkening streets, Mia dozing on Kyle's shoulder. He carried her effortlessly, this big, strong man holding his daughter with such gentleness. Natasha found herself noticing little things, the way his jaw was shadowed with stubble, the way his free hand hung at his side, close enough to hers that she could feel the warmth. When they reached his building, a worn but clean apartment complex with a small community garden out front, Kyle hesitated. "Would you want to come up for a bit? I know Ms. falling asleep, but I could make coffee, unless you need to get back." "I'd love to," Natasha said immediately. His apartment was on the 3rd floor, a walk-up that had Kyle slightly breathless by the top. "Sorry," he said. "The elevator's been broken for 3 months. Landlord keeps promising to fix it." "It's good exercise," Natasha said, though her own legs were protesting the climb in a way that told her she spent too much time sitting in offices and cars. The apartment was small, probably not more than 700 square feet, but it was clean and full of warmth. There was a lived-in cozy quality to it that Natasha's pristine penthouse lacked. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator, a stack of library books sat on the coffee table, and handmade wooden toys were neatly organized in a basket near the window. "Give me just a minute to put her to bed," Kyle whispered, carrying Mia to what must be her bedroom. Natasha looked around while she waited, taking in the details. The furniture was simple but well made, and she recognized Kyle's craftsmanship in the beautiful bookshelf against one wall, its wood grain rich and carefully finished. There were photos scattered around Mia as a baby, Mia blowing out birthday candles, Mia and Kyle at the beach, both of them sandy and grinning. What struck Natasha most was how clearly loved this space was. It might not be fancy, but it was a home in every sense of the word. Kyle emerged a few minutes later, pulling the bedroom door mostly closed behind him. "She didn't even wake up when I put her pajamas on," he said with a soft smile. "Today wore her out." "In the best way," Natasha said. "Coffee?" Kyle offered. "Sure." She followed him into the small kitchen, watching as he measured out grounds and filled the pot with water. His movements were efficient and familiar, and she found herself imagining him doing this every morning, probably while Mia chattered at him about her dreams. "Your home is lovely," Natasha said. Kyle laughed. "It's tiny and the heating is terrible in winter, and I'm pretty sure the people upstairs are training for a marathon at 3 in the morning, but it's ours. That's what makes it lovely." The coffee maker gurgled and hissed, filling the small space with rich aroma. Kyle pulled out 2 mismatched mugs. One said "World's OK ESD Dad," and the other had a faded picture of Big Bird. "Mia's going through a Sesame Street phase," he explained, handing her the Big Bird mug. They settled on the couch, sitting close but not quite touching. Natasha cradled the warm mug in her hands, suddenly aware of the intimacy of this moment. She was in Kyle's home, his daughter sleeping in the next room, drinking coffee in the quiet evening. It felt significant somehow, like she was being allowed into something precious. "Can I tell you something?" Kyle said after a moment of comfortable silence. "Of course. I haven't done this in a while. Had someone over, I mean, someone who wasn't Mia's friend's parent or my buddy from work. It's been just the 2 of us for so long that I kind of forgot how to do the whole adult interaction thing." "You're doing fine," Natasha said with a smile. "Better than fine, actually. So are you, despite your claims of not knowing how to be casual. This is different," Natasha said. "You're different. Different good or different bad. Very, very good." The air between them shifted, charging with possibility. Kyle set his mug down on the coffee table, and Natasha did the same. When he turned back to her, his eyes were warm and questioning. "Natasha," he said softly. "I'm going to be really direct here because I'm not good at games. I like you a lot. And I think maybe you might like me too." Her heart was pounding. "I do, I really do." "The thing is," Kyle continued, "my life is complicated. I've got Mia and she has to come first always. I don't have a lot of money or free time or any of the things you're probably used to. And I need to know if this is something real you're interested in pursuing, or if this is just an interesting diversion from your regular life. Because if it's the second thing, that's okay, but I need to know now before I get in any deeper." Natasha looked at this man, this kind, honest, straightforward man who'd somehow managed to shake up her entire world in the span of a week. She thought about the empty penthouse waiting for her, about the endless cycle of work and more work that had defined her life for years. And she thought about how she'd felt today, walking through that street fair, laughing until her stomach hurt, watching Mia slide down that slide for the 40th time. "I don't know what this is," she said honestly. "I don't know where it could go or how it would even work given how different our lives are. But I know that I think about you constantly, that seeing a text from you makes my whole day better. That today was one of the best days I've had in years, maybe ever, and I want more days like this. I want to know everything about you. I want to be part of your life, both of your lives, if you'll let me." Kyle's smile was radiant. Yeah, can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice low. "Please." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but Natasha had never been more sure of anything. When his lips met hers, it was soft and sweet and perfect. Not demanding or aggressive, just tender and full of promise. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing gently across her skin, and Natasha felt like every cliché she'd ever rolled her eyes at was suddenly, magnificently true when they pulled apart, both slightly breathless. Kyle was grinning. "I've wanted to do that since the coffee shop," he admitted. "Me too." They kissed again, longer this time, and Natasha felt years of loneliness and isolation melting away. This was what she'd been missing. This connection, this warmth, this feeling of coming home to a place she'd never been before. They spent the next few hours talking, really talking. Kyle told her about growing up in upstate New York, about learning carpentry from his grandfather, about his dreams of someday having his own shop. Natasha told him about the pressure of her childhood, about parents who'd loved her but never quite understood her drive, about the loneliness of being at the top. "Don't you have friends?" Kyle asked gently. "People you can talk to?" "Colleagues, yes. Networking contacts, hundreds. But actual friends, people who know me and care about me for reasons that have nothing to do with business?" "No, not really. I had a best friend in college, but we lost touch after I started working 80-hour weeks. Everyone else in my life wants something from me." "That sounds incredibly lonely." "It is," Natasha admitted, and saying it out loud to someone who actually listened felt like releasing a pressure valve she hadn't known was there. "It's so lonely. I have everything I thought I wanted and nothing that actually matters." Kyle took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. His palm was calloused and warm and solid. "Well, I don't want anything from you except more of this. More conversations, more time together, more getting to know each other. That's all." "I can do that," Natasha said, squeezing his hand. It was past midnight when Natasha finally called for a car to take her home. Kyle walked her down to wait on the street, his hand in hers. "Today was amazing," she said. "Thank you for sharing your world with me." "Thank you for being part of it," Kyle replied. "When can I see you again?" "Tomorrow," Natasha said hopefully. "Is that too soon? I don't want to overwhelm you or Mia." "Tomorrow's perfect. Mia has a birthday party in the afternoon, but maybe dinner, the three of us." "I'd love that." When the car arrived, Kyle kissed her again, soft and sweet under the streetlight. "Text me when you get home safe." "I will." On the drive back to Manhattan, Natasha stared out the window at the city lights, her lips still tingling from Kyle's kisses. Her phone buzzed. "Already miss you. Sleep well." She typed back, "Miss you too. Thank you for today, for everything." "Thank you for seeing me, for seeing us." Natasha felt tears prick her eyes. When was the last time she'd cried from happiness? She couldn't even remember. The next weeks fell into a pattern that felt both surreal and perfectly natural. Natasha began spending more and more time in Queens, working remotely when she could, rushing through meetings so she could make it to Mia's bedtime. Kyle would cook dinner while Natasha and Mia set the table, the little girl chattering about her day. They'd eat together, the three of them squeezed around Kyle's small table, and it felt more like family than any of the elaborate dinners Natasha had attended in her life. She learned Kyle's rhythms, the way he always woke up at 6 to work on projects before Mia got up, the way he sang off-key in the shower, the way he checked on his daughter at least 3 times after she fell asleep, just to make sure she was okay. She learned that he took his coffee with too much sugar, that he had a terrible weakness for bad action movies, that he volunteered at a community center teaching woodworking to at-risk teens every other Saturday. And Kyle learned her too. He learned that she was brilliant at what she did, but had lost her passion for it. That she had a wicked sense of humor hidden under her professional exterior. That she cried during animated movies, especially ones about families. That she'd never learned to cook because she'd always been too busy, but she desperately wanted to learn. "Teach me," she asked one evening, watching Kyle effortlessly prepare pasta carbonara. Cooking? Everything. How to make a home, how to slow down, how to be present. "You're so good at all of it." Kyle pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "You're already learning. I see it every time you're here. You're softer now, more relaxed. You laugh more." "That's because of you," Natasha said. "Both of you." Mia, who was coloring at the table, looked up. "Natasha, are you going to be my daddy's girlfriend?" Kyle and Natasha exchanged glances, both slightly flustered. "Would that be okay with you?" Natasha asked carefully. Mia considered this with the seriousness of a child making a major decision. "Will you still come over and play with me?" "Of course, and read me stories?" "As many as you want. And help Daddy not be lonely anymore." That one hit Natasha right in the heart. She looked at Kyle, who had suddenly become very interested in stirring the pasta. "Yes," Natasha said softly. "I'll do my very best to do that." "Then yes, it's okay," Mia announced, returning to her coloring like she'd just decided what to have for lunch, not essentially given her blessing to them building a relationship. After Mia was in bed that night, Kyle pulled Natasha into his arms on the couch. "She's right, you know," he said quietly. "I was lonely. I didn't realize how much until you came into our lives." "I was lonely too," Natasha admitted. "I just didn't know there was another way to live." They sat there in the quiet apartment, holding each other, and Natasha felt a peace she'd never known. But in the back of her mind, a worry was growing. Her two worlds felt increasingly separate, and eventually they would have to collide. Her colleagues didn't know about Kyle and Mia. Neither did her few remaining family members. She'd kept this part of her life carefully compartmentalized, telling herself it was because the relationship was new and she wanted to protect it. But the truth was, she was afraid. Afraid of judgment, afraid of what people would say about her dating a struggling carpenter, afraid of how Kyle would react to her world of corporate politics and wealth. The collision came sooner than she expected. 2 months into their relationship, Natasha's company was hosting its annual gala, a black tie event that raised money for various charities while also serving as a networking extravaganza. Natasha had been planning to go alone, as she always did, but Kyle had asked about it. "This big event you keep stressing about," he'd said. "What is it exactly? Just a work thing, really boring, lots of speeches and schmoozing." "Sounds terrible," Kyle said with a grin. "Want some company?" Natasha's heart had started racing. "You'd want to go." "If you're there, it can't be that bad. Besides, I clean up pretty well. You might be surprised." She'd hesitated, and he'd noticed immediately, "Unless you don't want me there," he'd said, his voice carefully neutral. "That's okay, too. I get that we're from different worlds." "No," Natasha had said quickly. "I want you there. I'm just worried you won't have fun. It's really not your scene." "Let me worry about that," Kyle had said. I want to see this side of your life too. So now, standing in her penthouse bathroom, doing her makeup for the gala, Natasha was a bundle of nerves. She'd sent Kyle money to rent a tux, which he'd initially refused before she'd convinced him it was completely normal for these events. He was picking her up in an hour, and she was terrified of what would happen when her two worlds finally met. The doorbell rang exactly on time. Natasha took a deep breath, smoothed down her emerald green gown, and opened the door. Kyle stood there in a perfectly fitted tuxedo, and her breath caught. He looked incredible. The formal wear highlighted his broad shoulders and strong build, and he'd gotten his hair trimmed. But it was his expression that made her heart melt. He looked nervous and excited and completely focused on her. "Wow," he breathed. "Natasha, you look stunning." "So do you," she said, drinking in the sight of him. "Really stunning." He stepped inside, looking around her apartment with wide eyes. "This is where you live?" "Yes," she said, suddenly self-conscious about the enormous space, the expensive furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. "It's beautiful," Kyle said. "Also about 10 times the size of my entire building." "It's too big," Natasha said. "Too empty." It never felt like home until recently. And now I realize home isn't a place. It's wherever you and Mia are. Kyle's expression softened, and he crossed to her, careful not to mess up her makeup as he kissed her gently. "I love you," he said. "I probably shouldn't say it yet. It's probably too soon. But standing here in this incredible place, and knowing you'd rather be in my tiny apartment, I love you, Natasha." Tears pricked her eyes. "I love you too, so much." They stood there, holding each other in her living room, the city glittering behind them. Eventually, Kyle pulled back with a rueful smile. "We should probably go before I convince you to skip this whole thing." "Tempting," Natasha said, "but I'm actually looking forward to showing you off." The gala was being held at a historic hotel in Midtown, its ballroom dripping with chandeliers and elegance. As their car pulled up, Natasha felt Kyle tense beside her. "Hey," she said, taking his hand. "You okay?" "Just a little out of my element," he admitted. "The fanciest thing I usually go to is Mia's school's spaghetti dinner fundraiser." "You don't have to impress anyone," Natasha said firmly. "Just be yourself. That's who I want there with me." They entered the ballroom together, and immediately Natasha felt eyes on them. Her colleagues were used to her showing up alone or occasionally with some corporate executive as a plus one. A handsome stranger in a tux was bound to cause speculation. Natasha. Her assistant Jennifer appeared at her elbow, looking between her and Kyle with barely concealed curiosity. "You look amazing, and who is this?" "Jennifer, this is Kyle. Kyle, Jennifer is my assistant and the only reason my life functions." "Nice to meet you," Kyle said, shaking her hand with easy confidence. "Natasha talks about you all the time, says you're a miracle worker." Jennifer beamed. "I like him already." Throughout the evening, Natasha introduced Kyle to colleagues and board members, business partners and competitors. She watched him carefully, worried he'd be uncomfortable or out of place. But Kyle was charming in his own way, asking questions and listening intently to answers, making people laugh with his self-deprecating humor. When one particularly pompous board member asked what Kyle did for a living, Natasha tensed, but Kyle just smiled. "I'm a carpenter." "Custom furniture and restoration work." "How interesting," the man said in a tone that suggested it was anything but, "And how did you and Natasha meet?" "She asked me for the time on the street one day," Kyle said easily. I smiled at her, and apparently that was enough to intrigue her. "It was quite a smile," Natasha added, squeezing Kyle's hand. The board member looked between them, clearly trying to figure out if this was serious or some sort of phase. Natasha didn't care. Let them wonder. Later, during dinner, one of Natasha's competitors, a man named Richard who had been trying to date her for years, stopped by their table. "Natasha, darling, you look ravishing as always." He ignored Kyle completely. "I was hoping we could discuss that merger proposal over drinks later this week." I'll have Jennifer send you my available times, Natasha said coolly. Come on, we both know we do our best negotiating over wine in a more intimate setting. Richard's smile was predatory. Kyle's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Natasha felt a flash of anger at Richard's blatant disrespect. Richard, this is Kyle, my boyfriend. Kyle, this is Richard Sterling. Boyfriend? Richard's eyes finally moved to Kyle, dismissive and calculating. How unexpected. Well, nice to meet you. He didn't offer his hand. Natasha, we'll talk soon. As he walked away, Kyle took a long drink of water. That guy's a piece of work, he said mildly. He's an arrogant jerk who can't believe I won't date him, Natasha said. I'm sorry about that. Don't be sorry, I'm a grown man. I can handle some corporate alpha male posturing. Kyle grinned. Though I was definitely imagining very detailed scenarios of him accidentally falling into the punch bowl. Natasha laughed, some of her tension easing. I love you. Love you too. The evening wore on, and Natasha began to relax. Kyle seemed to be genuinely enjoying himself, despite being so far out of his normal environment. During the dancing portion of the evening, he pulled her onto the floor. Fair warning, he said as he took her in his arms. I'm a terrible dancer. I don't care. They swayed together, Kyle holding her close, and Natasha felt something settle in her chest. This was right. They were right, no matter what anyone else thought. Thank you for bringing me, Kyle said softly. I know this wasn't easy for you. Why do you say that? Because I could feel how nervous you were. You were worried about what people would think about how I'd fit into your world. Natasha pulled back to look at him. Was I that obvious? Only to me. Kyle's expression was understanding, not hurt. And I get it. We are from different worlds. I don't have the education or the money or the connections that everyone here has. But Natasha, if you're worried that I'm going to be intimidated or feel inferior or whatever, don't be. I know who I am. I'm a good father, a skilled craftsman, and a decent man. That's enough for me. The question is whether it's enough for you. It's more than enough, Natasha said fiercely. You're more real, more genuine, more valuable than anyone in this room. I'm not ashamed of you, Kyle. If anything, I'm ashamed of myself for even hesitating to bring you into this part of my life. Then what are we doing here? Kyle asked, a hint of mischief in his eyes. Let's get out of here. Go get pizza in our fancy clothes. Give Ms. Babysitter a huge tip and go pick up our girl. Natasha laughed. You want to ditch my company's biggest event of the year. I want to be wherever makes you happiest. If that's here, we'll stay. But if you'd rather be eating dollar slices in that dress, then that's what we'll do. Natasha looked around the ballroom, at the people in their expensive clothes making small talk and political maneuvers. Then she looked at Kyle, at his warm eyes and genuine smile. Let's go get pizza. They left the gala early, Natasha not caring about the raised eyebrows or the gossip that would surely follow. They stopped at a tiny pizzeria in Queens, Kyle insisting it had the best slices in the city, and sat at a sticky table eating greasy pizza in their formal wear. Other customers stared, but Kyle just grinned. We look ridiculous, Natasha said, but she was laughing. We look happy, Kyle corrected. They picked up Mia from the neighbor who'd been watching her, the little girl's eyes going wide at seeing them so dressed up. You look like a princess, she told Natasha. Your dad looks pretty princely too, Natasha said. Daddy's always handsome, Mia said loyally. Back at Kyle's apartment, they changed into comfortable clothes. Natasha kept some things there now, and the three of them curled up on the couch to watch a movie. Mia fell asleep halfway through, snuggled between them, and Natasha looked at this little makeshift family they'd created. This is what I want, she said softly to Kyle over Mia's sleeping form. This, every day, not galas and board meetings, this. You can have both, Kyle said. You don't have to give up your career. No, but I need to change it. Reshape it into something that fits with this life, not one that takes me away from it. Over the next few months, Natasha made good on that promise. She restructured her role at the company, delegating more and focusing on deals that actually aligned with her original values, helping businesses, protecting jobs, making a real difference. She started leaving the office at reasonable hours. She stopped working weekends unless absolutely necessary. Her colleagues were shocked. Some respected the change, others whispered that she was losing her edge. Natasha didn't care. For the first time in her life, she was happy. Really, deeply, contentedly happy, she and Kyle fell deeper in love with each passing day. They had date nights when they could get babysitters, but they also had family dinners and trips to the playground and lazy Sunday mornings. Natasha learned to cook, with Kyle as a patient teacher. They took Mia to museums and movies and the beach. And slowly, tentatively, they started talking about the future. "I want you to move in with us," Kyle said one night, about 6 months into their relationship. They were in his bed, tangled together in the dark. "I know it's crazy. Your apartment is about 1,000 times nicer than this place, but I hate the nights you're not here." Mia hates them too. She asks every morning if you're going to be here when she gets home from school. Natasha's heart swelled. "I want that too." "But Kyle, this place is barely big enough for the two of you. Where would we even put my stuff?" "Then let's get a new place," Kyle said. "Something bigger. I've been saving money, and with you contributing, I know we'd need to figure out the finances in a way that feels fair, but we could do it. Find somewhere that feels like ours, not mine or yours, but ours. You'd be comfortable with that, with me helping financially." Kyle was quiet for a moment. "I'll be honest, it bruises my ego a bit. I'm supposed to be able to provide for my family. But I'm trying to get past my own pride and think about what's best for all of us. And Mia deserves space to grow, and you deserve a closet that fits more than 3 outfits." "Your masculinity isn't threatened by me having money," Natasha said, propping herself up on her elbow to look at him in the darkness. "You provide in so many ways that matter more. You create a home. You're an incredible father. You make me feel safe and loved and valued. That's what providing really means." "I love you so much," Kyle said, pulling her down for a kiss. "I love you too. And yes, let's find a place together." They started apartment hunting, which turned out to be its own adventure. They quickly discovered their needs were specific. Something affordable but spacious enough for the 3 of them, in a neighborhood with good schools for Mia, with room for Kyle to have a small workshop. After weeks of searching, they found it, a 3-bedroom apartment in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. It had character and space, with high ceilings and big windows. There was even a spare room that could be Kyle's workshop. It wasn't fancy, but it felt right the moment they walked in. "Daddy, this one is perfect," Mia announced, running from room to room. Kyle and Natasha looked at each other and nodded. This was it. Moving in together was chaotic and wonderful. Natasha brought her minimal furniture and her extensive wardrobe. Kyle brought his handmade pieces and Mia's seemingly endless collection of toys and books. They argued about where to put the couch, laughed about combining their completely different kitchen supplies, and fell into bed exhausted each night, happy to be building something together. Mia adapted beautifully. She'd always loved Natasha, and now having her there all the time was a dream come true. Natasha learned the rhythms of parenting, of bedtime routines and school pickups and scraped knees that needed kissing better. It was harder than she'd expected, and more rewarding. Work continued to be a juggling act. Natasha still had demanding days, but she'd learned to set boundaries. When Kyle's biggest commission yet came through a wealthy family, wanted him to build custom furniture for their entire home, Natasha helped him negotiate a fair price and manage the business side. They became partners in every sense of the word, supporting each other's dreams while building their life together. One evening, about a year after they'd first met, Natasha came home from work to find the apartment transformed. Candles were lit everywhere, soft music was playing, and Mia was suspiciously absent. "Kyle," she called out. He emerged from their bedroom, looking nervous and excited. "Hey, Mia's at a sleepover. It's just us tonight." "What's all this?" "Come here," he said, taking her hand and leading her to the living room. In the center of the room sat a beautiful wooden box. intricately carved with patterns of leaves and flowers. Natasha recognized Kyle's craftsmanship immediately. "Kyle, it's gorgeous." "Open it," he said softly. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a ring. Not an enormous diamond or anything ostentatious, but a beautiful simple band with a small, perfect stone. "Natasha," Kyle said, taking her hands, "before I met you, I thought I had my life figured out. It was just going to be me and Mia against the world. I'd stopped believing in the possibility of this kind of love, this kind of partnership, and then you asked me for the time." Natasha laughed through tears that had started falling. "You walked into our lives and changed everything," Kyle continued. "You made me believe in second chances and new beginnings. You love my daughter like she's your own. You've built a home with us, a family with us. Mia and I, we don't want to imagine life without you anymore. So I'm asking, will you marry me? Will you officially become part of our family?" "Yes," Natasha said immediately. "Yes, absolutely yes." Kyle slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. It was perfect, this moment in their living room, no grand gestures or elaborate plans, just two people who'd found each other against all odds. "Mia helped me design the box," Kyle admitted. "She's been bouncing off the walls keeping this secret. She knew, of course. I needed to make sure she was on board. She actually yelled at me when I told her I was nervous about asking, said, and I quote, 'Daddy, obviously she's going to say yes. She loves us.'" Natasha laughed, wiping her eyes. "She's not wrong." They called Mia immediately, putting her on speakerphone. "Did she say yes?" Mia's voice came through, full of excitement. Did she? She said yes," Kyle confirmed. Mia's squeal of joy was so loud they had to hold the phone away from their ears. "I'm going to be a flower girl, and Natasha's going to be my new mommy." "If that's okay with you," Natasha said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's the most okay thing ever," Mia declared. The wedding planning was as unconventional as their relationship. They decided on a small ceremony in a botanical garden with just close friends and family. Natasha invited her parents, who she'd been slowly rebuilding a relationship with, and a handful of colleagues who'd become real friends. Kyle invited his buddies from the carpentry world and some of the teens he mentored. Mia took her role as flower girl incredibly seriously, practicing her walk down the aisle for weeks beforehand. She'd insisted on a yellow dress because, in her words, "Yellow is the happiest color, and this is the happiest day." The ceremony itself was perfect. Simple and heartfelt, with handwritten vows that had everyone in tears. Kyle promised to love Natasha through stressed work days and lazy Sundays, through challenges and triumphs. Natasha promised to love Kyle and Mia, to build a life full of warmth and laughter, to never forget that the most important things in life couldn't be bought or negotiated. When they were pronounced married, Mia ran up and hugged both of them, creating a three-person embrace that the photographer captured perfectly. At the reception held in a community center in their neighborhood, with food from their favorite local restaurants, Kyle pulled Natasha onto the dance floor. "Mrs. Natasha Norton," he said, grinning. She'd taken his last name, something that had surprised her colleagues but felt right to her. "I like the sound of that," she admitted. "I love you," Kyle said. "Thank you for seeing me that day, for really seeing me." "Thank you for smiling," Natasha replied, "for being exactly who you are." They danced, surrounded by everyone they loved, and Natasha thought back to that rainy day on Madison Avenue when she'd been running late and stressed and desperate for the time. She'd been looking for minutes, but she'd found a lifetime instead. The years that followed were full and rich. Natasha continued to thrive at work, but it no longer consumed her. She made it home for family dinners, attended Mia's school events, took actual vacations. Kyle's business grew steadily, his reputation for beautiful custom work spreading through word of mouth. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Mia thrived with two parents who adored her. She grew from that sweet 5-year-old into a confident, creative kid who loved science and art in equal measure. When she was 8, she started calling Natasha Mom without any prompting, and Natasha had cried happy tears for an entire evening. 2 years after their wedding, Natasha and Kyle decided they wanted to expand their family. After several months of trying, Natasha got pregnant. The day she told Kyle, showing him the positive test, he'd picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing and crying. Mia was thrilled at the prospect of being a big sister. She helped paint the nursery a soft green that worked for any gender and read books to Natasha's growing belly every night. When their son was born, they named him James. After Kyle's grandfather, Mia held him with such careful tenderness that Natasha fell in love with her daughter all over again. "He's so tiny," Mia whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. "I was this small once. Even smaller," Kyle said, his arm around Mia's shoulders as they all looked at the newest member of their family. The early months with a newborn were exhausting and magical. Kyle took on as much as he could, waking up with James at night when he wasn't nursing, doing endless loads of laundry, making sure Mia didn't feel neglected. Natasha worked from home as much as possible those first few months, learning to balance conference calls with feeding schedules. It was messy and chaotic, and sometimes overwhelming, but it was theirs. This life they'd built together, this family that had started with a simple question about the time on a busy New York street. When James was 6 months old, they had a family photo session. The photographer captured them all together, Kyle with James in his arms, Mia making her baby brother laugh, Natasha with her arms around all of them, everyone smiling with genuine joy. That photo went on the wall in their living room, joining others that chronicled their journey together. Natasha looked at it often, amazed at how much her life had changed. She'd had everything she thought she wanted: success, money, power. But she'd been empty inside, lonely in ways she hadn't even recognized, and then Kyle had smiled at her and everything had shifted. One evening, several years after their wedding, Natasha and Kyle sat on their couch after putting both kids to bed. James was now 3, a wild ball of energy who idolized his big sister. Mia was 10, smart and funny and kind, still that same sweet girl who'd asked if Natasha was lost all those years ago. "Can you believe this is our life?" Natasha asked, her head on Kyle's shoulder. "Sometimes I still can't," Kyle admitted. "Sometimes I look at you and think about how easily we could have never met. If you'd asked someone else for the time, if I hadn't smiled, if you hadn't come back to that coffee shop. I would have found you somehow," Natasha said with certainty. "The universe doesn't create connections this strong and then let them slip away." "Look at you, getting all philosophical," Kyle teased, kissing her head. "I'm serious. Before you, I was sleepwalking through life. Everything was about the next deal, the next goal. I wasn't really living. You woke me up. You and Mia showed me what actually matters." "You showed us things too," Kyle said. "You taught Mia that women can be powerful and successful, that she can be anything she wants to be. You taught me that accepting help isn't weakness, that partnership means supporting each other's dreams." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together. Outside, the city hummed with its endless energy, but inside their home was peace. "Do you ever miss it?" Kyle asked eventually. "Your old life, the fancy apartment, the power lunches, the constant adrenaline." Natasha considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the rush of closing a big deal, but I don't miss the loneliness. I don't miss coming home to an empty apartment, eating takeout by myself, not having anyone to share my life with. This us, our family, our life together, this is everything. This is exactly where I want to be." "Good," Kyle said, pulling her closer, "because you're stuck with us now." "No returns, no exchanges," Natasha laughed, tipping her face up to kiss him. "Best deal I ever made." As the years continued to pass, their family found its rhythm. Natasha had eventually made another bold career move, leaving her firm to start her own venture capital company, focused specifically on helping small businesses and family-owned companies. She was using her skills and experience to make the kind of difference she'd originally dreamed of, and the work was fulfilling in ways her old job had never been. Kyle's woodworking business had become successful enough that he'd hired 2 apprentices, young people from difficult backgrounds who he was teaching the trade. He loved mentoring them, passing on the skills his grandfather had taught him. On weekends, the family would sometimes go to his workshop, and even little James would put on safety goggles too big for his head and help Daddy sand pieces of wood. Mia grew into a remarkable teenager, managing the tricky balance of school, friends, and family with grace. She'd inherited her father's creativity and her mother's drive, talking about becoming an architect someday. She adored her little brother, even when he was annoying, and the bond between them was strong. One day, when Mia was 15, she came to Natasha with a question. "Mom," she said. Natasha still felt a thrill every time Mia called her that I have a school project about family history. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Do you remember the day you met Dad? Like, really remember it?" Natasha smiled. "Every detail. Why?" "I'm doing a presentation about pivotal moments, about how small decisions can change everything. And I was thinking about how if you hadn't asked Dad for the time that day, none of this would exist. I wouldn't have you as my mom. James wouldn't exist. Our whole family started because you needed to know what time it was." "That's a beautiful way to think about it," Natasha said, her throat tight with emotion. "What made you go back to that coffee shop?" Mia asked. "After you saw him the first time." Natasha thought about it, remembering that day years ago. His smile. "It sounds silly, but when your dad smiled at me, really looked at me and saw me as a person, not just another stranger on the street, it made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, maybe. The possibility that there was more to life than what I'd been living." "That's not silly," Mia said. "That's kind of perfect, actually." "Your dad is pretty perfect," Natasha agreed. "You guys are gross," Mia said, but she was grinning, "but also the best. My friends are always saying how cool it is that you two are still so in love. Most of their parents barely talk to each other." "We work at it," Natasha said honestly. "Love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every day. We choose each other, and we choose this family every single day." Mia nodded thoughtfully, clearly thinking about this for her project. Then she hugged Natasha tight. "I'm really glad you asked Dad for the time that day." "Me too, sweetheart, me too." That evening, after both kids were in bed, Natasha told Kyle about her conversation with Mia. "She's doing a project about us," Kyle asked, amused. "About pivotal moments, about how small choices create big changes. That's pretty profound for a 15-year-old. She's a pretty profound kid. Wonder where she gets that from," Natasha teased. Kyle pulled her close, and they swayed together in the kitchen, no music playing, just the two of them moving in sync after years of practice. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked. "About how different things could have been, all the time," Natasha admitted. "But not in a way that makes me anxious. More in a way that makes me grateful. Grateful that I was running late that day, that my phone died, that you happened to be standing outside that particular deli at that exact moment. Grateful that I smiled," Kyle added. "Especially grateful for that smile." They kissed, soft and sweet, a kiss that spoke of years together and years still to come. Outside their kitchen window, the city lights twinkled, and somewhere in that vast urban sprawl, other people were having their own pivotal moments, making small choices that would ripple out into their futures. But in this moment, in this kitchen, in this life they'd built together, Natasha and Kyle were exactly where they were supposed to be. Years later, when James was graduating high school and Mia was visiting from college with her girlfriend, when Kyle's hair had gone silver at the temples and Natasha had finally stepped back from running her company to focus on mentoring young entrepreneurs, they would still talk about that first meeting. "Tell us the story again," James would ask at family dinners, even though he'd heard it 100 times. And Kyle would take Natasha's hand and tell their children how a stressed CEO had asked a struggling carpenter for the time one rainy afternoon, and how a warm smile had changed everything. Because that's what love stories were, really. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but small kindnesses that opened doors to something bigger. A smile that reached the eyes. A choice to see someone, truly see them. A willingness to let someone past carefully constructed walls. Natasha had asked for the time, but what she'd found was timeless. A love that grew and deepened with each passing year. A family that filled her heart in ways she'd never imagined. A life that was rich not in the ways she'd once measured success, but in all the ways that actually mattered. She'd had everything and nothing. And then, one smile had given her everything that truly counted.